of the challenges that this year has already presented all of us, platforms are playing an ever-increasing social and economic role. Just think about the fundamental changes we've undergone in terms of how we interact, how we conduct business, how we shop for products and services, and even how we learn and study. And this is not just for young or old people in America, in Europe, in Asia, but for everyone, everywhere. And our platform impact session will explore this topic in much more detail. Jennifer Schenker will be moderating this panel, and Jennifer is an award-winning journalist and the founder of the Innovator, and she's been a World Economic Forum Tech Pioneers Judge for the last 20 years. Jennifer, without further ado, I'm handing over to you.
Good afternoon. Hope you can see me. And thank you for the introduction, Petra. I'm very pleased to have with us here today as panelists, Llibert Argerich, the Vice President of Marketing at Udemy, Joe Schorge, who is the founder and managing partner at Isomer Capital, and Arun Sundararajan, who's author of The Sharing Economy and the Harold Price Professor of Entrepreneurship and Professor of Technology, Operations, and Statistics at NYU's Stern School of Business. As Petra mentioned, we're here to talk about the social and economic impact of platforms. And I'd like to kick off our discussion by asking our panelists what kind of impact COVID has had on platform businesses. And Joe, let's start with you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just to introduce myself and my business a bit, Isomer Capital is an investment firm. We invest in very early in big ideas, shall we say. So very early stage companies in a very broad mix. We have over 700 companies in our portfolio right now. So my lens and my point of view on this discussion today is how these are performing as a business. I took a look through our portfolio before the call, and we have about 44 companies who self-identify themselves as marketplaces of one form or another. I suspect we have a similar number which are what I would call marketplace support. So providing the software that drives the marketplace or other form of platform support. Interestingly, these are spread across 13 countries, and they cut across pretty much every sector you could think about in business operation. So the question that all of us investors have been asking this year is, how has COVID affected these businesses? I think as a headline, my answer would be broadly in line with the sector they operate in. So on the two extremes, we have a business in travel and tourism. It's suffering, and you can understand that. It's a great business model. It had its best revenue month ever in January. It had its worst revenue month ever in March. So that's a pretty clear picture related to that sector. Likewise, on the other end, businesses which are enabling the COVID period have done extremely well. So we've seen a lot of things in e-commerce, in the shift to home, so home improvement, art people want for home, all sorts of things you might not have thought about earlier this year have really prospered through COVID, and particularly where you weren't able to shop. So people aren't able to go out for food, they aren't able to go out for things they need for home, remote working, education, healthcare. So what I would say is that platform businesses have often had a slight advantage because they, of course, aggregate many options where you couldn't go out to do your shopping, whatever that, I don't mean shops as retail only, but platforms were able to deliver that at home, and so they're prospering in the main, aside from a couple of sectors, as I said.
Thanks a lot. Arun, I know you did a study on the impact on the restaurant business. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm sure. Glad to be joining this, and Thanks to the organizers. I mean, this is sort of a timely gathering and sort of a really important topic. I think we often during a crisis, we see changes accelerated. And this crisis is no exception. You know, it's a substantial crisis. And so the acceleration is quite substantial. But, you know, often the acceleration is not necessarily only in the technological change itself, sort of like, you know, technology aimed at addressing the crisis. I mean, we've certainly seen accelerated vaccine development and so on, but in sort of acceleration of changes that are ongoing because of prior technological change that suddenly sort of get a boost. And, you know, the restaurant industry is certainly a good example of this. Because, you know, because we were forced into certain kind of behavior changes, not being able to go and sit at a restaurant, having to order in, you know, this kind of behavior change forces us to try something new that already was around, but we maybe never got around to. And then as more and more people do that, that behavior then sticks afterwards. And so if you look at the numbers, I mean, my own study was in collaboration with Uber Eats and, you know, pre and post lockdown. So like, you know, Feb 1st through March 15th versus, you know, March 16th through May 1st in New York City, for example, and sort of different windows depending on like, you know, when cities locked down. We saw a more than doubling of order volumes through the platform. Like, you know, if you compared pre and post pandemic. And, you know, this is not an isolated, you know, this is not an isolated example. I was pouring through DoorDash's S1 filing on Friday. You know, they filed it to go public. And they have documented a roughly doubling of like, you know, the gross order volume that is flowing through their platform in Q3 relative to Q2. I think it went up from 3 billion to 6 billion in gross order volume they fulfilled. And, you know, as Joe mentioned, while the travel sector might be taking sort of a short-term hit, I actually think that what we're starting to see is the platform business model will dominate in the post-pandemic travel sector. I mean, again, you look at Airbnb's numbers for Q3 of 2020, they were up to 80%, over 80% of what they were in Q3 2019. So it's a very rapid rebound, much more rapid rebound than the hotels. And so, you know, some of the platform models like the restaurants have certainly benefited because of interface shifts. You know, we are relying more on digital interfaces, certainly education, certainly like, you know, sort of food ordering, retail, all of these. But other platforms like Airbnb are going to benefit in the long run because of other related reasons. I mean, I think the single most important reason is that, you know, we're going to have to rebuild trust in the familiar, right? You know, there's all these like meeting a friend, sitting at a restaurant, taking the subway, you know, sitting in your office, staying in a hotel room, going to the airport, all of these things that we didn't think twice about. We're going to now have to rebuild trust in these sort of experiences, like, you know, in this post-pandemic era. And if you think about the set of people, the set of companies in the ecosystem that really know how to build trust in the unfamiliar, or like, you know, trust in new experiences, it's the platforms. In the short-term accommodation business, it's Airbnb. And so I'm very optimistic about not just the platform businesses that have seen a positive shock to their system because of changes in interface and people staying at home, but I'm equally optimistic about those platforms that might have taken a hit early on, like Uber and Airbnb, but I think will come back stronger and end up with a much bigger pie, slice of like, you know, sort of the pie as it sort of regrows.
Great, thank you so much. So Llibert, let's turn to you now. And, you know, from your perspective, you were operating a platform. How is your platform benefiting from this strange pandemic environment?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. and talk to you about the Udemy as a platform. So just for context, for those who may not know about Udemy, Udemy is a learning marketplace, online learning marketplace. Basically, what we do is we connect real life experts with people who want to learn. So we have 57,000 instructors teaching over 130,000 courses in 65 languages. Today, we have 35 million students and 7,000 corporate customers who basically use our learning services to learn, to upskill, right? So the world's changing very rapidly, and both companies and individuals need to upskill and reskill constantly. And Udemy is really in the middle of that. When it comes to COVID, one of the challenges coming into 2020 for me as a marketer was, how can I accelerate the awareness of online learning in the general population, right? So the reality of today, and sorry, Arun, that might be a bit controversial, but traditionally education was built for a world that no longer exists, right? People need flexibility. They need access to skills that they can apply today and tomorrow to their jobs, right? And what happened with the shutdown of the economy, the inability to really move around during the high of the pandemic, was that people turned into learning. So we saw an acceleration of awareness and adoption of online learning. I generally say it's about 5 years into one, right? So we leapfrog 5 years of awareness, of adoption, of basically of usage of our platform in one. I'll give you some data. We saw a spike of 425% in course enrollments. So we saw people from all over the world, and we mapped out the lockdown dates to the spikes in traffic. And it's kind of beautiful to see how, as soon as the lockdowns were implemented, we saw people turning into the platform and starting to really think about, hey, what does that mean for me? How can I continue evolving in my career? How can I make sure that I maintain and keep my job? If unfortunately I was laid off, how do I skill up to make sure that I can find the next job, right? So we've seen and again, I'm talking about Udemy, but this is true for all edtech, right? So you've seen rounds of announcements of a lot of funding and a lot of new startups around edtech that are popping up because the demand is there. And I truly believe that, to what Arun was saying, right, there's a change in behavior that we've seen is not only the fact that people are forced into online learning, is now that they've discovered that online learning is there, right? Then the benefits of asynchronous learning at any point in time. I don't have to be physically stuck into a classroom, but I can actually learn on my couch. I can learn while I'm exercising. I can pretty much have the flexibility to build my own hours and really have access to people around the world. It's very much like this, right? So we're able now to have this conference. I'm in San Francisco. Some of you are in London. Some of you are in New York. And having this ability to connect is really important. So I believe that post-pandemic, this behavior will stick, and the adoption of online education, but all of kind of online services will continue to prosper and grow.
Thank you. So now I'm going to ask, and this is a question to any of the panelists who wish to answer. You know, we've touched on restaurants and food delivery, on travel and education. Beyond those sectors, which other sectors do you see growing fastest post-pandemic?
Well, I can take a stab at a couple of other sectors. I think, certainly we've touched on restaurants, but I don't think that we've unpacked just how deep the transformation of that industry will be. I think that there's going to be a fundamental restructuring of the supply model there, where today, in the United States, at least, maybe like a small single-digit percentage of food prepared by others is sold through platforms. We're going to be looking at a healthy double-digit percentage of that number in a few years. And so this is almost $1 trillion market in just the United States. But a lot of it won't come from sit-down restaurants who are selling through the platform on the side. It will come from dedicated supply infrastructure that has been built for platforms only. Cloud kitchens, sort of like, both individuals renting space and sort of mass production through, platform, companies like McDonald's and so on. I think you're going to see a parallel shift in local retail. And, this is sort of a missing piece of the retail transformation that we've seen induced by platforms over the last 25 years, right? Because most of online platform-based retail is the stuff is somewhere far away and it gets shipped to you. We've had a little bit of grocery and, through Instacart and Walmart and Amazon and others, but I think the pandemic has laid bare the fact that a local business that relies on local customers does not have a digital interface to interact with them. And they cannot build this on their own. They can't go to Shopify and say, build me an online store. And so they're extremely well suited, like an Airbnb host is, to offer a short-term accommodation business through a platform, to attach to a platform for recommendations, for customer relationship management, for maintaining that business continuity in the context of interruptions, and also for that to sort of, so we're going to see a dramatic expansion in the number of small businesses that become omni-channel through a platform. And I'm not sure who this platform is going to be. It could be Postmates or Uber Eats that are already starting to enter this space. It could be Instacart that started in this space. It could be Walmart that builds out its sort of local delivery infrastructure into, and transforms itself into a platform. It could be a completely new player. But that's, again, like, sort of a multi-$100 billion sector where there is no clear platform leader. So it's certainly one that I see as being incredibly promising. I do have some other comments in response to Llibert on, sort of the future of education, but maybe we'll save that for later.
Okay.
I do have to say that I am sitting in my NYU office right now, and I'm in my 12th week of teaching students in person. So, it's not like, it's not all has not been lost as yet,
Okay, so you outlined, I think you did a great job outlining some of the opportunities as more business shifts online, including local business, and the fact that we don't have clear winners in these spaces yet. So let's talk about where the opportunities are, not just for platforms, but also for traditional businesses to maybe get into the platform game. And here, Joe, I'll turn to you, and maybe we can talk about how Miracle helps some of these traditional businesses to become omni-channel players.
Sure. Can I take a moment and react to Arun's comments as well?
Sure, of course.
I thought were interesting. To me, when I look at our existing businesses, what's very clear is this interface change that it's not the wording I've used, but I think we're going to use it going forward now. So lots of businesses, platform businesses, are prospering that you wouldn't have predicted earlier this year. So for example, a funny but real example, people are home and they're looking at the wall that they should have painted a few years ago and thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll do that now. And so a business out of France called Mano Mano is doing extremely well because that has driven huge uptake in do-it-yourself at-home improvement. So lots of this interface shift is happening, and that's, you name the sector, I can tell you a business, literally every segment. What's not clear to me yet is what behaviors will stick after. We're certainly seeing a short-term win on this interface shift, but it's unclear to us how much of that will be sticky behavior and how much will people go back to their local shop, which doesn't have a digital interface. What's for sure is that the competition landscape is changing as a result of this. And so to come to your question about a larger company, we work with a number of companies that invest with us in order to figure out how to engage with these new businesses. And I would classify the kind of engagement levels as 3 levels. The first one is, let me try to understand what's going on in my sector. So research, study. If I have a window onto the technology startups, I can figure out maybe the trends in 2 to 5 years, say, as these businesses grow up. What we didn't anticipate is COVID would, as Llibert said, it would take 5 years and put it into 1. So I totally agree. That's a wonderful surprise. But one level for, and I think most traditional companies that I know are on that level at least. How do we understand incorporating platforms in our work or dealing with them? Part 2 is engage. So either start to sell through a platform business that's in your sector, or buy. We spoke a lot about consumer-facing businesses, which are visible and obvious, but there's an equally large segment which is B2B. So supply chains are being heavily affected on the back end, where you're sourcing materials through platforms with suppliers in other parts of the world. That is equally big, but less visible. And then also you can engage with platforms by investing in them and learning how they work and playing an active role. And then the third level of engagement is launching a platform within your company for a particular product line, or to aggregate demand and supply. And so you raise a good point, which is that's hard. That's a very difficult thing to figure out, the competitive landscape in an area you haven't competed in before. And so there are some shortcuts. Miracle, as you point out, is a software company that is kind of platform as a service. So you don't have to write your own software. They can get you up and running in a matter of months. And that is one of a new range of businesses offering to help traditional industries make use of platform methods.
Thanks. I mean, yes, I think that, there are a number of examples of startups who are helping traditional companies to try and more quickly move into the platform business. Rails Bank out of the UK is offering like banking as a service with better interfaces and help banks who want to become more digital more quickly. And then there's an insurance company out of Hong Kong that is offering a similar kind of thing to insurance companies now. But figuring out, for traditional companies, figuring out where to position yourself in the landscape, who to partner with and how to partner can be really tricky, especially when we're seeing some of these platform players like, say, Grab in Southeast Asia, that is just expanding into many different verticals almost simultaneously. And of course, everyone is aware of Amazon, and Amazon has just finally verified all those rumors that it is indeed going to go into the pharmacy business. So the traditional companies feel more and more pressure to react to that. And it's difficult to know exactly how to approach this, or whether it makes sense to partner. In the case of Singapore, they're now issuing 5 digital banking licenses, and this has given rise to alliances between unlikely bedfellows. You have gaming companies partnering with supermarkets and online used car marketplaces to become banks and banking platforms. People that you never in a million years would think. So, how do you see those partnerships forming, and how do traditional companies make sure that they don't get the short end of the stick? Arun, would you like to take that?
Sure. I think that this is this kind of diversification is far easier for platforms It's just sort of a natural part of their growth strategy. I mean, we've been aware of this phenomenon of envelopment, right? Where you gain dominance in one sector and then you sort of move into adjacent sectors. And so what I think what Grab is doing is sort of, consistent with the time-tested playbook of, taking your power in one industry and moving it into adjacent ones. And because these platforms are scale without mass, expansion into adjacent sectors is easier. In many ways, this will be accelerated also by the pandemic, because as Uber has discovered, diversification has sort of served them well. Moving into Uber Eats certainly sort of smoothed out their revenue numbers this year as their ride-hail business sort of got hit, and they didn't have to, they didn't go bankrupt like the rental car companies that are sort of carrying the costs of having those cars and not being able to service them. But, I think where the traditional companies who are going to be a lot more cautious about this kind of diversification for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, one is that they think much more carefully about, sort of brand and reputation implications of being in a sector that they are not leaders in. If you've built a strong brand in the insurance sector or in the travel sector, and you're suddenly jumping into an adjacent, I mean, your brand dilution or your brand reputational damage, if you don't actually sort of deliver well, that's sort of an additional concern that they have. They also may have, sort of a more measured approach to governance and to thinking about sort of the regulatory issues in that sector, whereas platforms have sort of this move fast or at least platforms used to have this move fast and break things approach, which, Facebook has sort of, succeeded very well at, right, at moving fast and breaking things. So, I'd say that, the reticence of a traditional corporate to move too fast into adjacent sectors may not be a bad thing strategically, because I think we're in a phase of platform expansion where the low-hanging fruit are gone, right? And any new sector that is going to sort of be transformed by platforms is going to have a strong physical world component, is going to have, and we've already seen this with Uber and Airbnb over the last 10 years relative to Facebook and Google, like, 10 years before that, right? It's a much harder road to hew. And, like a couple of years ago, I collaborated with Michael Jacobides, who I know is on the next panel, and Marshall Van Alstyne from BU, and we all wrote a World Economic Forum report together about different aspects of platform businesses, growing a platform, sort of ecosystem building, especially from the traditional corporate view, and governance. And, it led me to conclude that a big source of competitive advantage for traditional corporates in the future is going to be because they understand governance better, and because they are more measured in their sort of expansion and into sort of like, because the sectors that we're going to go into are not going to be ones where moving fast and breaking things is going to be a viable long-term strategy. So if you've got sort of good experience with corporate governance and you think about things from a more measured point of view, just one other point, which is sort of tangential because it relates to your question about like sort of, should I partner? Should I do this myself? Should I, I've always maintained that it's not a good idea for a traditional company to simply become a provider on a platform. We saw Gap do this with Amazon 20 years ago, and it didn't really help them. If at all you do it's got to be in a substantial partnership with an equity stake or preferred placement. And even that, I argued very vociferously against NYU joining Coursera 8 years ago. Because to me, it was just like, hey, why do you want to build this platform that is, sort of building its reputation on the brands of sort of like, why are you setting yourself up for failure, right? And, the reality has been different, but it's, it's a trade-off between, I think what companies often forget is that in this desire to move rapidly and to sort of enter this platform world, they forget about the advantages that they have, like, you know, the brand advantages that they have, the governance advantages that they have, the financial advantages that they often have, and they don't strike as good a deal with the platform as they're sort of partnering with them as they should. And, you know, because the thing to remember is that, again, like, you know, we're not talking about a Facebook, Google platform world. We're talking about a physical world, platform world. And so corporates have more to offer than they may realize. And this could cause them to sort of be able to strike better deals with these platforms as they think about partnering.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the AOL Time Warner deal
Yes.
as an example. But also, you know, in addition, you made some great points about, you know, the strengths that traditional companies have. And I think one additional one is the deep roots that they have in the community or countries where they are, and even their importance to the economy. And so, you know, whereas, I don't know, a New York City might, you know, clash with Airbnb or Uber, in Germany, you know, they're gonna move to help support the automakers or the heavy manufacturing. So, so that those good and positive ties with government, I think, can be helpful as well. Llibert, let me ask you, what, you know, do you have a view on whether all traditional companies should try be thinking about adopting platform business models?
Yeah, and I will provide a slightly different point of view to what Arun mentioned, right? Although all the points he made are very, very fair, right? So each company needs to understand where they're strong. What has been happening for the last 20 years is the digital transformation. And it's still surprising and shocking to me, talking to different practitioners in different organizations, how far off big traditional and even small traditional companies that are rooted in the physical world are away from digitalization, right? I was just participating in a panel a couple of months ago, and questions I was getting from some of the people who were attending were, hey, how do I convince my board or my CEO to adopt digital products, right? To digitalize, right? And I know that this is a tension that exists today. So my point of view here is like, yes, obviously you need to root your business on and look at the strengths and do not sell yourself short. I completely see that point. But the reality is that businesses need to realize and be very aware of what is their business model, what are they strong at, and what are the things that they're not going to be able to move fast enough to get at, right? And that's where disruptive business models will help with, right? And having an alliance and a partnership. And again, if you talk about the top big mammoth companies, I get the point, but there's a lot of companies, small companies, medium-sized companies that can benefit and are benefiting today from the synergies of partnering with platforms. It gives them faster access to market. It makes their business digitalized, where they're rooted into the physical world, and especially in today's world where we're seeing this shift in behavior and I agree with Joe, we don't know how much of that's going to stick, but there's been a fundamental shift, right? Is it going to be completely as it is today in COVID, but a big percentage going to stay, is going to stick around. So that's my point of view. So I think companies and companies who are not do not have the capabilities are more physically rooted and don't have the capabilities of moving fast. They need to think about what value can they get from these partnerships on the platforms, right? And that comes from a guy who's worked in digital platforms his whole life, right?
Okay, and so how do they get the balance right? Because a lot of big companies have watched the platforms take, you know, have a winner take all strategy. And a lot of these companies are used to that sort of competitive mindset as well. So even if they can convince their board that they should develop a platform model, the first reaction is, yeah, but we want to control it. So if they do that, if they go into platforms with that kind of an attitude, then their competitors are not going to want to join the network, and they're not going to create as strong of an ecosystem as they might. So what, can we give some good examples of rules of the road? And that's to anyone who wants to answer.
I'd love to comment. I'm not sure I have a preset rules of the road, but I wish I did. It's a great idea. Maybe the Launchworks team have it already. I was thinking as Arun was talking, sometimes in the rush to accelerate, we're forgetting kind of normal business rules. So just because a platform is successful and working doesn't mean that its brand and value proposition aligns with your brand and value proposition. So that, something clearly to manage there, that you may want to adopt that kind of platform mentality, but your brand position in the market, maybe you have a premium pricing and the platform is a low price platform, and that, that's common and that's normal business. The other thing I would think about is channel conflicts. You don't want to sell at one price on one platform and a different price on a different retailer channel or whatever, and that's just normal traditional thinking. That's not different. To make a real example, you brought up food delivery. So we hear Michelin-starred restaurants don't necessarily want to be on Deliveroo next to the local pizza shop.
Yeah.
Their value proposition, it's very different. So guess what? There are other platforms for that more premium segment. And I believe that over time, the platforms will segment in the way that traditional businesses can. So it might not be winner takes all, but it might be a few winners take all.
I think that's a great note for us to end on, that we're going to see different platform models emerging, and that that companies have to keep an open mind and develop the right rules of the road. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for joining us via Zoom.
Thank you to our first panel. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Arun, Joe, and Llibert. It's a fascinating debate. I could easily listen to you for a lot longer. I'm going to do one sneaky thing and have one key takeaway that I'm preempting. So the influence and reach of platform business models will definitely continue to grow exponentially. I think the flavor in which we're going to see this grow might differ from region to region and vertical to vertical as well.